This is Growing Up Aspen, a Joiner's Table podcast with Chris Pomeroy and Andy Collin. And our guest today is Valery, as I know her, Valery Moore Kelly. Since we're talking about art, we're getting into that stuff.
Yeah.
It feels to me like Aspen's kind of gone through its little wave of stuff with all the different folks coming in as it changes and does stuff. And I feel like in the very beginning, a lot of what Aspen wanted to try to do was put the locals up front and center in the galleries, in the space, in the windows, designing the buildings. It was all in the local community that did that, the Benton building and whatnot. Now that's sort of changed. I mean, the art museum is designed by some guy in Japan that's never been to Aspen. So the design doesn't even represent the local area. Aspen has gone into that, but it also feels like it's starting to come out in a different way too. Like there are some locals that are starting to set up and reach out. Can you speak to some of that ebb and flow of the culture that in the art scene in Aspen? Because it feels like it might be coming back a little bit.
Well, I mean, one great piece of art comes to mind, a film that was called Freak Power.
Yeah.
That was about Hunter Thompson.
Yeah.
And I think that film to me captured kind of the spirit of Aspen in those days when Hunter Thompson ran for sheriff.
Yeah.
And, back in those days, right, there was like the old conservative ranching community, like the sheriff at the time, who everyone knew beat his wife.
Yeah.
But he kept getting reelected.
Yeah.
And, then there are all these hippies come to Aspen, and there are some charming clips in that film that I just took me back to my childhood, like the hippies running around Aspen, hanging out in Pepke Park and so I guess I say that because, Aspen's evolved and changed through a whole lot of different times and places. And then you have like Walter Pepke and Elizabeth Pussy Pepke, and they were very sophisticated, wealthy Chicago family, and they brought in a lot of their friends. And there's always been so many different kinds of people in Aspen. And I think what you're speaking to, Andy, of that early days in Aspen was when it was smaller. The scale was way different than it is now.
I think that's a big part, yes.
I think that's a huge part of it. And I think there was a lot of shared values in respect for everyone's differences and a melting pot. And it's so cool. My dad used to call it messy vitality. And I think that artistic was really a very artistic bent. And there was also, the business side. And so to me, there's always been a mix of that in Aspen. And I would say that no matter who comes to town and who calls Aspen their home, we all have a right to be here. And I think that I think that bringing in the art and from the outside, it's probably not true to say that it all originated in Aspen. I mean, I think there was a lot that did come outside.
And where did Nick DeWolf come from? He made it big somewhere else and then came to Aspen. But it really, what it felt like to me was, and I could say this for Chris's parents as well as your parents as well as my parents, when they came to Aspen, they shed everything. Their life, I mean, yes, they called the family and they stayed in touch with relatives and all that stuff, but the whole lifestyle, it was shit, burn all the old clothes, let's get the new stuff, and you joined in and you were part of it. And it wasn't like, now with your jets and your in and outs, it's as if people aren't necessarily fully committed. Do you know what I mean? To that ride. And so I feel like you sort of have a lot of, not posers, but a lot of people who wish they could have that. They could pay for it so they could have it and experience it for 2 weeks, not live it for 10 years. There's a big difference, and you zip in and zip out. There's a big difference than you're committed, because like you said, it's tough. Sometimes it's a struggle, but that struggle is what pulls you together in a way too.
I think there was a lot of a real depth of the Pepkas hosted. I mean, Aspen hosted in 1949 was the Goethe bicentennial, right? That was the celebration of the 200 years since Goethe's birth. Like Goethe is the Shakespeare of Germany. Yeah. And, Albert Schweitzer came to America for the one and only time he ever came to America. So that humanistic ideals that were birthed the Aspen Institute, the mind, body, spirit was very strong and very real and cared for. And again, I think the scale, was so different. I think people were super inspired by the land and the spirit of the land and, whatever kind of interpretation everybody had of that. And, like that melting pot, like you just never knew, the dishwasher might be a kid from a really wealthy family back east.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, which I'm sure still happens too. It's just that I would say from my perspective, I think that culturally and societally, we have changed over time to be a very materialistic society.
Well, it's funny because I feel like I use Aspen as a frog because Portland, when we talk about all this change and we talk about people moving in and doing all this stuff and we're doing this, I'm not talking to offend the people that live there, because the truth is the same stuff that's happening in Aspen is happening here in Portland. I mean, people moving up from San Francisco
it's happening
like
here too.
Crazy, and just because they don't want that big city thing, and Portland kind of still feels small, and so they want to come up and, an hour and a half in any direction, you're on the beach getting fish and chips, you're up on a ski slope, you're in the middle of a river water skiing, any of that stuff, and it's all within hour and a half, So,
well, but I think to Valery's point, it's a cultural thing.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's why you're seeing it in Portland, and I see it here on the other coast too.
Yeah, I guess that, part of my reaction to what you're saying, Andy, is, and I think there's this tension in this all along, is, the nostalgia and the wish, like the way we wish it could go back to the way it was. And, I think that's, I'm in the, my field of work is to build relationships with all different kinds of people who are here and help them feel like a part of the community in a way that they can, for example, support, give philanthropic contributions to support a nonprofit. And so, I think, inclusivity is important. And I also find it disturbing the way people act towards each other these days. Like, just to me, I remember this when the girls were little. I wanted to start a campaign in Carbondale and get people to wave at each other when we passed on the road. Right. Like, it used to be that you would always wave when you passed on the road. Like, that was just part of the culture. And then as it grew and more people came to the valley, that wasn't the culture anymore. And now I feel like it's devolved to the point where people hardly speak to each other. Like, there's this really cute little sandwich shop in Carbondale. It's teeny tiny little space. Like, you go in there and it's, I don't know,
standing room only,
10 by 20, and it's like the little waiting area, and you're ordering your sandwich, and you're in there, and there's seating. And I can't tell you how many times I go in there and there's people in there and I'm like the only person who acknowledges other people.
Wow.
Like, you walk into a small space and just to me, I'm just like, hi, hi stranger, never seen you before, but isn't it great? We're getting our sandwiches and our pastries, and nice to see you. How's your day going? And people look at me like I'm a freak.
Yeah.
Bridget Strang and I were just talking about this. Bridget Strang was like, she got out of the car in the City Market parking lot and said hi to some guy. And, she just thought he was going to fall over. Like, the woman said hello to him. You're just like, what has happened to this world where we just can't speak to each other? And so I think I think part of that is because people come from cities, and they just, in cities, when there's that many people around you just don't speak.
True.
Yeah.
It's totally true.
I remember hearing about after 9/11 happened in New York City, that New Yorkers all of a sudden, not all of a sudden, but from that impactful event, they all were like, how are you doing? When they would see each other, they spoke. Yeah. I think that kind of trauma, where we realized gosh, we got to stick together here and help each other out. And I think that I think the materialism of our culture and the consumer society has created a lack of, because it's competition, and because people are looking outside of themselves for their meaning and purpose. Like, I've got to, I want other people to admire me because I've got a great job, or because I have a big car, and it's like looking outside of ourselves for affirmation is the kind of polar opposite of the mystical, spiritual, of like more valuing, that we're all like sunbeams from the sun, and just because we're separate sunbeams doesn't mean, we aren't part of the sun, or like just separate waves. And just to have that feeling of care and being together in life is, I feel like that's kind of the distinction that started to happen. And, when you go skiing, like I always feel like whenever I'm skiing, I'm like, this is so great. Like, here we all are, like skiing down the mountain, and, we're in the gondola together. And, I'm usually just pretty happy person. Like, wasn't it a great day? And where'd you ski? And, aren't the conditions great, or whatever? Like, I just feel like I want to connect with people. And, there's more times than I would like where people don't want to connect. And at the same time, people do really respond to that. So I don't know. I guess I just want us all to be together.
I feel like too, a lot of people have all these expectations, and they have all these unrealistic setups. And it's like, to me, it's like, you can't demand respect. You have to earn it. And so it really is people not wanting to put in that effort and that time at that and to earn that. In other words, they want to cheat. They want to go around the book so they can do it this way instead of having to spend the time or eat some crow and say you're sorry about something or whatever it is. That whole contact that makes it happen. I feel like a lot of people are sort of trying to avoid that. And
what was that? There was a quote, and it's on the tip of my tongue, but it was something like, we spend all of our time trying to buy things to impress people that we don't know, or something along those lines. You know the one I'm talking about. But
Well, and I heard a story too from a friend who works in the hospitality business in Aspen, and saying, let's go out together again, it would be so fun. He's friends with my nieces, and he's like, but definitely not during the holidays. And I was just asking more questions about it, and I said, so what is it that's so difficult about that time? He said, I think it's because these people come to Aspen and they've spent an enormous amount of money, and they have this expectation about how they want everything perfect. And, they're just like, I paid so much money for this, drinks at this bar, and now my drink is not meeting my satisfaction. And he just said it's very difficult. He encounters people a lot in Aspen who are just so pissed and unhappy. And, it's kind of like White Lotus. I don't know if you guys watched that. But I love that series. Like the guy, who's like, was just so pissed the whole time about every little thing. And I guess that, I don't want to be all like Pollyanna and like, everything's great. We should all be happy all the time. And I also feel like hope and the power of hope is really important. And, we just have so much to be thankful for around here. And at the same time, of course, we know there's a lot of people who suffer a lot, and it's very difficult to afford to live here, and work is long hours and hard, and people are probably underappreciated. And so there's a tension there that I remember when I graduated from college and I came back to Aspen, and I lived in town that summer and worked in town in the restaurant business. And I remember being surprised, like, because I'd been away at boarding school. I went back east to prep school for 3 years and then college for 4 years. And I hadn't really been in the culture in town. And I was surprised by how it felt like, I would go into the shop just to buy something, and the salesperson just would ignore me,
Right.
And I just always remembered Aspen being like way more friendly. Like people were
like the lady whose entire job was to do a sandwich board through.
Yeah.
She survived in Aspen by doing that.
Yeah.
Or, Peppermint Patty, who had their ice cream thing that she drove around. I mean, there's all these little kooky characters that are almost like Simpson-like, you know what I mean?
Right.
And I feel like that to me is what is the old part that I remember. The Georgia who would go skiing in her shorts in a snowstorm, It's like it's like there's so many of those, so many characters. And I feel like what's happened is that was the zoo, and now the zoo got bought, and so now the characters that were idolized are no longer really there because they got bought out. You know what I mean? And so now you have folks that own all that stuff, but they're not really contributing to that. It sounds to me like when you add some zeros into the equation, you change the dynamic. And it really is something that shouldn't be, because it's about personality, it's about character, it's about who you are. The dollars and zeros shouldn't really make that much of a difference, but it seems to,
Yeah, there's so many. I just was reading a study about this the other day about happiness and, kids in Africa. Like I've seen this before, kids who went away to do a study abroad program in Africa or a very poor country, and they came back and they just were so astonished by how happy these kids were who had nothing, who lived in an orphanage, and all they had was like a little ball that they were playing soccer with that was made out of rubber bands, kicking it around the yard, and just smiles on their faces and just so joyful. And
we've commoditized happiness, unfortunately. And to your point, I've told my kids a lot of times, because my youngest son plays baseball, and he's like, why aren't more people from other countries into baseball? And I'm like, look, dude, we have it really good in this country, and I can't even tell you how much money I've spent on baseball gear and trips and gas and everything else. But if you go to a third world country, to your point, Valery, it doesn't take much to put together a soccer team. It's $11 for a ball for all 25 kids, or however many kids there are.
Yeah,
it's just so different than what we have here.
Yeah.
But
yeah,
I feel like a lot of what you're getting at, Andy, is that nostalgia piece. And I found a quote I put in the chat. I don't know if you saw it or not, but if you're fans of the show True Detective, at least the first season.
Yeah, first season was cool.
This particular quote always struck me as interesting, where he says, the good years when you're in them, or do you just wait for them until you get ass cancer and realize that the good years came and went?
Yeah. Yeah, like youth is wasted on the young. Like
exactly. But you don't know when it is the good years. And, the quote unquote good years that we loved about the old Aspen, those are long gone. They live on in our memory.
Well, it also seems like it's innocence. The more complicated it gets, the more that changes, I mean, I got to Aspen and no one locked their cars. It wasn't until Ted Bundy came, and even after Ted Bundy, they kind of scared people for a couple months, 6 months or whatever, and then they went back to their old putting the keys under the car thing again,
Yeah, but I guess what I'm getting at is that the new folks in Aspen now, maybe this is their good years.
That's right. That's kind of my point too.
It's all relative. So.
Yeah.
Well, it is true. When you ask people in 2000 and, I had some, when do you think Aspen went bad? And people say, probably 2010. You know what I mean?
Right.
So our gauge is, it's different, but I think more than anything, it's really more about looking at things, pulling things apart. That's kind of what I felt like the Pepkes were trying to do, whether it was the physics or the ideas, the design conference or whatever. They were trying to get people to come and talk, and pull all this stuff apart. What's good, what's bad, how can we solve things? I mean, that was John Denver with Windstar. You know what I mean? They just pulled people in here and talk about it. Let's get into the dirt and let's discuss this stuff. And when did that become a bad thing to do? When did that become offensive? It became offensive because certain people, I guess, don't want to do that. You know?
Well, I would venture to guess that probably most of the people in power are doing it for money. And if we're trying to do things that, you know, aren't going to make them money, I mean, there's just, you know, there's some bad people in the world. I hate to say it, like, you know.
Well, I think too, a lot of it is, how do you know what it's like unless you've grown up there? In other words, that time frame that we grew up in, it's going to be really hard to share that with people. I mean, that's kind of what we're trying to do. And by talking about our lives and talking about this stuff, we're trying to show how we feel or give an image of what that was like. But it's really hard. How do you show someone in the future a bit of the past? You know, I mean, you can show them a movie or something, but you can't get them to really experience it. They don't really know what you're talking about.
I think too, what was unique about that time, and again, you know, like we've said before, is like scale and numbers. I think what gives people hope is to have agency over the future, right, and to be able to, you know, have the autonomy to and do things and work and offerings that, like, you see how it comes together, and it's, you know, people feel hopeful because of that. And, you know, I think that, you know, if in Aspen in those days, maybe we were guided more by really strong values and like high-minded, like I was talking about the humanism from the Aspen Institute. And that, but you know, that has to translate into prosperity and abundance for people. And, you know, when it's a struggle to survive, and like the values of our society are, you know, you're only cool if you drive the right car, you have the new iPhone, or, you know, the right skis or whatever. And there's people who are cut out of that opportunity. Then, you know, the reality is it's not shared. And so I think, you know, again, that tension has always happened in Aspen. And I mean, I'm kind of a philosophy geek, and I think in big picture terms, but I think that there is that, you know, spiritual values and morals that have last a lot longer than the ones about, it's like the people on their deathbeds who, you know, it's not like, bring me my trophy, I want to look at my trophy one more time before I die. You know, they're like, where's my nephew? I want to see my nephew. Right. And, you know, so those kinds of values that really last. And so I think it's more generative to talk about, you know, all the things that you know, strengthen us and help us be better. And, you know,
well, I feel like, you know, the money thing, I felt like the big example I remember was when I was a kid up on Highlands looking up and seeing some dude in, like, obviously like a $2,000 ski suit, and watching him try to ski, and the guy just could not do anything. And then there's Mark, loose puffy jacket, big baggy ski pants, boom, 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 going right through the moguls, just looking like amazing. And I'm like, that shows you that it's about form, not about what you put on. In other words, you can put it on and it ain't going to make you look good on skis.
Yeah.
I still love the insult, though. The old insult was so-and-so skis and jeans. You know, it's like we did that a lot too, and my brother and I used to fight over these crappy wind ski pants, and I mean, that was it. It was like you just throw them over your jeans and go down the hill, and anyone that judged you probably couldn't ski as well. So, you know.
Yeah, it is. I feel like it's interesting. I feel like it is a little fishbowl that's gotten bigger, but it's still a fishbowl. And so I feel like it's an interesting petri dish to use for the rest of the world. In other words, I wish people would think a little bit more about cause and effect, look at things and relate to that a little bit more. And maybe, who knows, hopefully that's what's happening here. I mean, all these kids we're interviewing, a lot of kids have done some really cool stuff and had some really interesting things to say, you know? So maybe it will strike into some folks, you know? I mean,
yeah.
I feel like it's a choice is what I think. And I think a lot of people don't know that they have a choice or what the choice is. And that's part of the problem. So much time goes by so fast, so quick that people just forget, you know? I mean, it's a freight train. Every day it feels like it's getting faster and faster.
I think one of the big lessons for me in this past year as I've gone through this huge personal transformation is that it's a quote from ancient Greek. Every situation has two handles. We can grab resentment or gratitude.
Right.
That's awesome. Yeah.
And gratitude is probably the healthiest way to go.
Gratitude is the attitude that creates the space for grace.
That's right.
Yeah. So I'm super grateful to have grown up in Aspen. It was a charmed time in life. And I know that the sense of independence and hope and gratitude that I have comes from I lived, this wonderful life out in nature. And so I'm so lucky that I had that. And I just hope that other people can find those experiences still in the beauty of nature and horses. My daughter has grown up riding at Strang Ranch, and I still teach pony club, and just seeing those kids, are so excited about caring for a horse. And I think it takes hard work. I just saw Marianne Williamson speak. She came to the Aspen Chapel. Mm-hmm. And, she was just like, yeah, everybody get out there and do what you can to help. That's what we all got to do. We all need to take our part. So I love that you're doing this series of your podcast to kind of reinvigorate the vitality of the Aspen values and the life and the appreciation that we all had for that, because it is really positive and salient.
I think it could be. I always feel like it's best if you use the past in order to build a better future. And I feel like our past, if we let it go, someone else is going to record it, and so it won't be us. It'll be someone else, and it needs to come from us. So I feel like it needs to be set up where it's us together doing stuff. And so I feel like that's sort of the incentive of what I wanted to do with the podcast. Was sort of
we're capturing a lot of old stories and voices from that time and that.
And the characters. Who are our friends that we grew up with? Who are the kids on the school bus? And where did they come from?
I know. I love the characters. I have such an appreciation for people and authentic, crazy, kooky artists and of all different kinds.
Thanks for listening. The authors of Growing Up Aspen would like to thank you and would like to also thank the Aspen Times and the Aspen Daily News for giving us materials for our book, Growing Up Aspen, Adventures of the Unsupervised, which you can get at twistandturnpress.com and any local bookstore. Thanks.